There's a bottle almost in every kitchen in America right now. Probably yours, probably mine until a few years ago. And it's doing something to your brain that nobody really talks about. Not in the way they should. Not your heart, your brain. So let's start there. In the 1950s, a researcher named Ancel convinced a generation of doctors, governments, and food manufacturers that saturated fat was the enemy. That butter, lard, tallow, the fats humans had been cooking with for thousands of years, were quietly killing us. And in their place, a new category of fat rose up: cheap, industrial, manufactured at scale, seed oils, soybean, corn, canola, safflower, cottonseed. And we bought it. Completely. By the 1980s, vegetable oil had replaced animal fat in processed food, in restaurants, in home kitchens. The American Heart Association was endorsing it. Government dietary guidelines were promoting it. Crisco was running ads calling it the healthy choice. The problem, and this is where it gets uncomfortable, is that the science Ancel built that entire argument on was incomplete at best, and selectively presented at worst. He had data from 22 countries. He published data from 7, the ones that fit the story he wanted to tell. That's not me being conspiratorial, that's just what the records show. But okay, bad science happens. That's not the real story here. The real story is what these oils are actually doing once they're inside you, and specifically, what they're doing inside your skull. Your brain is roughly 60% fat by dry weight. That's not a metaphor or an approximation. It's mostly fat, and the type of fat that ends up in your brain depends heavily on what you eat. Your body doesn't just burn dietary fat for energy. It incorporates it into cell membranes, into neurons, into the myelin sheath that wraps around your nerve fibers like insulation around a wire. So, when you eat a diet high in a particular type of fat, that fat literally becomes part of your brain structure. Now, the fats in industrial seed oils are overwhelmingly omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids, linoleic acid mostly. And linoleic acid is not inherently evil. You need some of it. But the ratio matters enormously. Humans evolved eating a diet where omega-6 to omega-3 intake was roughly 1-to-1, maybe 4-to-1 at the outside. Today, the average American is eating somewhere between 15-to-1 and 25-to-1. Some estimates go higher. That imbalance, that's the thing. That's where the story turns. Omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids compete for the same enzymes in your body. They use the same metabolic pathways. When omega-6 dominates, massively, chronically, it pushes the system toward producing pro-inflammatory signaling molecules, eicosanoids, cytokines, compounds your immune system uses to respond to injury or infection. Inflammation in the short term is fine. It's how you heal. But when the signaling is chronic, when your body's in a low-grade state of inflammatory alarm all the time because the ratio of fats in your cell membranes is completely off, that's different. And the brain has a special problem with this. There's a structure called the blood-brain barrier. It's not a wall exactly, more like a highly selective filter. Tight junction proteins between the endothelial cells lining your brain's blood vessels. It controls what gets in, keeps out pathogens, large molecules, a lot of toxins, but it also controls what information the brain gets about the state of the body. Inflammatory signals, immune activation. What research has been showing, and this is relatively recent, like last decade or so, is that chronic systemic inflammation can degrade that barrier, make it more permeable. And when things cross the blood-brain barrier that shouldn't, you get neuroinflammation, microglial activation, your brain's immune cells going into a kind of low-level overdrive. Microglia are fascinating. Under normal conditions, they're basically maintenance cells, pruning synapses, clearing debris, monitoring for threats. But activated microglia,
chronically activated, start doing damage. They release their own inflammatory compounds. They can start pruning the wrong synapses. They interfere with neurotransmitter function. Fogginess, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, mood dysregulation. These aren't vague symptoms. They're consistent with what neuroinflammation does. And here's the part that took me a while to sit with. A lot of people are experiencing exactly those symptoms and attributing them to stress or sleep or just getting older, which might be partly true. But the possibility that the oil you're cooking your eggs in is contributing to a low-grade inflammatory state in your own brain, that possibility isn't even on the table for most people because nobody told them. The processing part matters too, and I don't think enough people understand what actually goes into making these oils. Take canola oil. It comes from rapeseed. To turn that seed into the clear, odorless oil in the bottle on your shelf, it goes through a process involving high heat, mechanical pressing, chemical solvent extraction, usually hexane, which is a petroleum derivative, degumming, bleaching, and deodorization. The deodorization step alone can involve temperatures above 200 degrees Celsius. Those are industrial temperatures, and polyunsaturated fatty acids are chemically unstable at high heat. They oxidize, they form aldehydes and lipid peroxides, compounds that are genuinely toxic at sufficient concentrations. Some of them are carcinogenic in animal models. Some of that oxidative damage happens during manufacturing, some of it happens when you cook with the oil at home, and some of these oxidation products, you're consuming them every time. There's a researcher at the University of Surrey, Martin Grutwald, who spent years analyzing the compounds produced when vegetable oils are heated. He found that one single portion of fish and chips fried in vegetable oil contained more aldehydes than the WHO's acceptable daily limit by a significant margin. That's not a fringe finding from a wellness blogger. That's published analytical chemistry. Now, contrast this with what humans were actually eating for most of our evolutionary history. And I don't want to romanticize the past or act like ancestral eating was perfect, but the fats available were mostly saturated and monounsaturated. Animal fats, butter, tallow, lard, coconut and palm where they were available, olive oil in Mediterranean regions. These fats are chemically stable at high temperatures. Saturated fats have no double bonds to oxidize. That's just chemistry. They don't form the same breakdown products when you cook with them, and they carry fat-soluble nutrients, vitamins A, D, E, K2, which most of us are deficient in. More than that, the fatty acid composition of animal fats matches much more closely to what was in the human diet when our brain structure was developing over hundreds of thousands of years. Cold-pressed oils are a different conversation. Cold-pressed olive oil specifically. There's a substantial body of evidence connecting extra virgin olive oil consumption to reduced neuroinflammation, not just cardiovascular benefits, but specifically neurological ones. The oleocanthin in it inhibits the same enzyme as ibuprofen, not metaphorically, literally the same biochemical target. The Predimed trial, big Spanish study, long-term, real-world populations, found that people supplementing with extra virgin olive oil showed significantly better cognitive function over time compared to a low-fat control group. That's a randomized trial, not an epidemiological association, an intervention. So you have, simultaneously, evidence that industrial seed oils may be destabilizing brain inflammation and evidence that traditional, minimally processed fats may be actively protective. The gap between those two things and what ends up on grocery store shelves, in school cafeteria fryers, in hospital food, that gap is enormous. And the question of why is genuinely complicated. Some of it is inertia. Dietary guidelines from the 80s are really hard to walk back without someone being held accountable. Some of it is economics. Seed oils are cheap to produce at scale. The infrastructure for them is massive. Soy and corn production in the US is subsidized. You're not going to displace an entire agricultural industrial complex with a few inconvenient studies about aldehydes. But it's complicated, and we should keep pouring this stuff into our bodies without asking harder questions are not the same position. The people who've been paying attention, not the wellness influencers necessarily, but actual researchers in lipid biochemistry and neuroinflammation, have been raising these questions for a while. The institutional response has mostly been to move slowly, very slowly. Meanwhile, the average person is making choices based on information that's 40 years old. I swapped out the seed oils in my kitchen probably 2 years ago, switched to butter, ghee, tallow for cooking, cold-pressed olive oil for dressings and low-heat applications. It's not expensive. Tallow is actually cheaper than most seed oils if you buy it in quantity.
The cognitive difference I noticed is hard to attribute causally. Could be placebo, could be the other dietary changes I made around the same time. I'm not claiming it cured anything, but I kept thinking about those microglial cells sitting in their low-level activation state, pruning things they shouldn't be pruning, releasing signals that shouldn't be getting released, just because of the ratio of fats in someone's cell membranes. The brain is plastic. It changes based on inputs. We've accepted that about exercise, about sleep, about stress. The idea that what you cook your food in might be reshaping the inflammatory environment of your own nervous system, that's not a wild claim. That's just lipid biochemistry following its normal rules. What's strange is how little attention it gets.